Fighting games is not a genre known for having rich stories and deep lore. Most of the time, these elements are barely a backdrop for the different characters to slug it out. But every now and then, we get exceptions to this rule. I consider Skullgirls as one of these exceptions and among the best ones. It's a 2D fighting game with gorgeous graphics and easy to pick but hard to master gameplay. What makes Skullgirls so unique in my personal opinion is how much lore it has, despite being a relatively recent title with only one game. Two actually, if we're counting the mobile version. The story can be a bit confusing, that's why I chose to narrate its events through a chronological order, for the most part. I think this is the best way to make things digestible and easy to follow. Trust me when I say, it's worth knowing these characters' backstories. Despite the general light-hearted style of the game, Skullgirls can be quite dark sometimes. Last thing I want to touch on, Skullgirls is an extremely technical game, but don't expect to see any technicalities in this video. You won't find any tutorials or guides here. Firstly, because I suck at it. And secondly, this isn't the focus of this video or channel in general, but if it's the story you're after, then you are at the right place. But before that, as always, if you like this content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe and click the bell icon so you can be notified with every new video posted. The Canopy Kingdom, the main stage of Skullgirls, a fictive country that shares many similarities with real-world places and cultures. It's ruled by the Renoir royal family, and it's home to different creatures and races. Humans, parasites, cyborgs, androids, living objects, fishmen, catwomen, Mai, and other weird and strange life forms. Currently, the kingdom is going through a period of peace, but it hasn't always been the case. Until recently, it was in a long and destructive war against the neighboring countries. That war had ended very badly for those other countries, which were destroyed and became to be known as the No Man's Land. If the Renoir family were leading the country officially, the underworld was ruled by the Mafia, and the strongest family of them was undoubtedly the Medici, a greedy and ruthless clan who infiltrated several key sectors in New Meridian, the biggest city in the country. To maintain a good image of the family, the Medici were also sponsoring seemingly innocent groups and companies like the Cirque des Cartes, a circus that was in reality a hiring spot for potential hitmen for the Medici. This is how Sarabella, the grappler with the big extra arms, ended up working for the Medicis. She was an orphan, native of the No Man's Land, who was adopted by the Medici family. As a result, she was extremely loyal and grateful for them, even though she isn't evil herself. She's kinda like Billy Khan, but with curves. Some tried to take down the Mafia in the past, but it never ended well for them. Such was the fate of Ben Birdland, a policeman who was a thorn in the Medici's side until he was beaten by his corrupt co-workers and left for dead. No need to specify that the Medici were behind that incident. Fortunately for him, he was taken by Lab H, one of the many labs that were formed by order of King Franz to counter the threat of the Skullgirls. What is a Skullgirl? We'll get to that in a moment. Ben Birdland went through an extreme makeover to fix his broken body under the supervision of Dr. Avian. He was reborn as Big Band. He actually liked his new body. Basically, he became Robocop, but with more class and saxophones.
The world is full of obvious things.
The other labs were also active and contributed with their own ways to the endless fights against the Skullgirls. One of these labs had a special Black Ops group working for them, known as the Last Hope, a special squad composed of nurses with amazing fighting skills and different holidays as nicknames. The most famous of them is Valentine. I'm sure you know her. It's the naughty ninja nurse with the big bone saw. Back to the Medici family, one thing is worth noting is that not all of its members were unredeemable jerks. It's true that the head of the family, Lorenzo, was the biggest of jerks for sure, and so was his eldest son Vitali, but his second son, Marcus, was different. Marcus despised his family's criminal line of work and wanted nothing to do with them. He distanced himself from his family and chose to live a straight and quiet life with his wife and daughter, Filia. But the curse of the Medici followed Filia to school. Most kids avoided her because of her last name, except one, Carol, an upbeat young girl who never cared about Filia being a Medici and had no problem becoming best friends with her. One day, Carol found a stray dog and showed him to Filia. The two discovered that the dog was a host to a parasite calling himself Samson. Filia decided to adopt the dog after she was convinced by Samson that he would protect her if she ever needs his help. But she keeps the existence of the parasite a secret to her parents. The main religion of the Canopy Kingdom is the Divine Trinity, a faith based on the worship of a group of 3 goddesses. There is a grand cathedral dedicated to them in New Meridian, and many devout followers attend to it regularly. But what these naive devout don't know is that the Trinity's sole objective is to destroy the world. For what purpose? To escape their dimension, out of boredom? No one truly knows, but they are serious about destroying the world, and for that reason they created the Skull Heart. This demonic artifact has the power to grant a wish to any woman she obtains it. But there is a catch. If the woman's heart is impure or has a little bit of selfishness, then she transforms into a Skullgirl, a mindless killing machine with incredible power in addition of the faculty to raise and command the dead. Since the Skull Heart is a mean of destruction first and foremost, and it's a tool created by a group of jerks, it always prioritizes transforming its user to a Skullgirl. No matter how pure or selfless the wish is, it will always twist it and find a way to make it look impure. Skullgirls are supposed to be mindless as mentioned earlier and always be at the service of the Trinity. But sometimes, a Skullgirl can show resistance to the corruption of the Skull Heart and still conserve some of her personality and ideals, as we'll see with the current Skullgirl, Mary. However, the change in personality is inevitable. It may take some time from a Skullgirl to another, but ultimately, they will all succumb to its corruption and transform into mindless fiends. The good news are, there can only be one Skullgirl every 7 years, and the last Skullgirl who appeared 7 years before the events of the game was Queen Nancy from the royal family. When she was a human, she was against the war between her kingdom and the neighboring nations. She got hold of the Skull Heart and made a wish for peace. But, as you may have expected, even the word peace isn't pure enough of a wish for the Skull Heart. The wish went ungranted for years until the queen grew impatient. She realized with horror that the only way to achieve peace was to transform into a Skullgirl. That would force all 3 nations at war to drop their infighting and ally against a common enemy. Once she became a Skullgirl, she immediately began doing what Skullgirls do best, spreading chaos. Queen Nancy was one of the worst Skullgirls in history, so much so that her husband, King Franz, had to form an alliance with his former enemies to fight Nancy. Eventually they managed to defeat and kill Queen Nancy, which was ironically the beginning of the peace that she wished for. But the war against her was brutal and many victims fell in it, including King Franz himself. Parasol, their daughter, witnessed all that and dedicated herself to destroy the Skull Heart, believing that it's pure evil and nothing good will ever come from it. She formed a special unit called the Black Egrets to track and destroy the Skullgirl whenever she appears and fight the underworld criminal syndicates in between. Following the war between the allied nations and the Skullgirl Queen Nancy, the region of No Man's Land was a complete wasteland, with the most of its inhabitants homeless or refugees. A group of kids from there chose to take refuge in a makeshift orphanage. Mary and Patricia were the oldest girls among them and were like sister figures to the rest. They used to dress like maids to look much older than they actually were and gain some authority among the other orphans. Things got a lot worse for the kids when they were attacked and captured by slave traders one day. But Patricia was too rebellious to surrender. She helped Mary escape, but sadly couldn't escape herself and was caught. The slavers had a cruel punishment waiting for her. They gruesomely mutilated her body, dismembering her and gouging out her eyes, a terrorizing warning for the other kids if they ever think of opposing them. It turns out that the slavers were working for the Medici Mafia. They took the kids to New Meridian and hid them in one of the Medici's warehouses. Fortunately, the labs caught wind of the refugees being captive and raided the warehouse. They freed the kids, but didn't know what to do with Patricia. She was broken beyond repair, and Valentine had lost hope for her, saying that the only thing they could do is to consider her a casualty of war. But Big Band had another opinion. He brought her to Dr. Evian, who remade her into an anti-Skullgirl weapon under project name Peacock. Patricia's rebirth as Peacock was a resounding success, maybe more than the Doctor had predicted. She was very powerful with magic-like abilities. Thanks to her synthetic parasites, she could wrap space and reality, allowing her to teleport in short distances and even give life to objects inspired from her favorite cartoons, which she used to create her own gang. But despite what had happened to her, she kept her childish personality. The good news are, she was loyal to Lab 8 and grateful to Dr. Evian, and thus she took her anti-Skullgirl duty very seriously, despite being out of control, violent, and in a lot of cases, quite insane. In parallel of these anti-Skullgirls creations, Lab 0 was also working on their own weapons. The head of the lab was a mad scientist known as Brain Drain. Unlike Dr. Evian, he liked having total control over his creations and wasn't a fan of the anti-Skullgirl weapons having free will. He tasked his subordinate/co-worker Valentine to find a test subject suitable for his next invention. The unlucky girl was none other than Carol, Philia's friend. Valentine found her among the refugees during the raid on the Medici warehouse. It is not known why Carol was there, but that would seal her fate in the worst way possible. Under the direction of Brain Drain, Valentine performed gruesome and inhumane operations on the poor girl. In addition, Brain Drain made sure that she remains obedient by implementing a mind control device on her. She had to remain in a constant state of pain and rage, which were the fuel of her power, and that's how Painwheel was born. 1 year before the events of the game, Mary, the orphan who had escaped the slavers, obtained the Skull Heart from a suspicious nun, more on her later. Her wish was to come back at those who caused her friend Patricia suffering and misery. And sure thing, her newfound powers allowed her to eliminate every single slaver without mercy. News of the appearance of the new Skullgirl reached the Canopy Kingdom, and the Last Hope squad was dispatched to fight her. They weren't a match against Mary and her partner Nun, and were all eliminated as well, except Valentine. She was spared when Mary saw the potential of the nurse as a servant. Valentine accepted to work for the Skullgirl and betray the labs, all for the sake of saving her life and eventually avenging her friends when she gets a chance. In case she fails, she had hoped that her creation, Painwheel, would finish her mission and eliminate Mary on her behalf. Also, being so close to the Skullgirl would allow Valentine to know more about this formidable being, which always piqued her curiosity as a scientist. Mary learned that the slavers were sponsored by a larger group, the Medici family, and this is how they became the next target of her vengeance. She decided to go to the Canopy Kingdom, where their HQ is located. The nun that was seemingly obeying Mary was known as Sister Agatha, and she serves the Grand Cathedral of the Divine Trinity in New Meridian. But unlike everyone else, she knows what the Trinity really are and what's their true objective. In reality, she is not even a nun. She is a monstrous abomination known as Double, who specializes in shapeshifting. She takes the form of a nun most of the time, probably because it's the easiest way to trick her victims. Her main mission is to find candidates for the Skull Heart and make sure that the demonic artifact is obtained by the most suitable of them for a maximum amount of chaos. She obeys the Skullgirl in appearances only. Her true loyalty goes to the Trinity, or the Masters as she calls them. Double has been secretly and effectively doing her job for a long time, unbeknownst to everybody. 14 years before the events of the game, she was the one behind the annihilation of the Cantiello family that used to be the rival of the Medici. During the birthday of Selene Cantiello, Squiggly's mother double disguised herself as a fan and offered the skull heart as a present to Selene. Immediately after that, she informed the Medicis that the Cantiellos were in possession of the dangerous artifact. The Medicis considered that act as treason of the goodwill agreement between the two families and sent Black Dahlia, their most feared hitman, alongside other henchmen, guns blazing. Squiggly was among the first victims, and her father followed her soon after. But before he died, he made his parasite Leviathan, who was in the service of the Cantiello family for generations, attach itself to Squiggly. At the sight of her family getting slaughtered, Selene made the wish of resurrecting her beloved ones, which transformed her into a Skullgirl. The wish was granted, but not in the way Selene was hoping for. The Cantiellos were brought back to life as undead zombies under the control of the new Skullgirl, who sought vengeance against the Medici at any price. Squiggly was resurrected too, but thanks to Leviathan, she avoided being under the control of Selene and kept her free will. The lab sent the anti-Skullgirl weapons to fight Selene and her undead army. Big Band asked the help of Squiggly to stop her own parents. She hesitated at first, but after seeing the transformation of her parents into ruthless killing machines, she had to accept. With the help of the anti-Skullgirls, she succeeded in defeating her mother, but that also meant that she was going to die right after that, as she was only brought back to life thanks to the power of the Skullgirl. During the funerals, the head of the Medici, Lorenzo, was present to express his condolences in front of the general public only. The true reason of his presence was to stitch the Cantiellos' mouths, so that they don't say that it was the Medicis behind their deaths, if they ever come back to life again. Lorenzo was very lucky to escape the wrath of his Skullgirl 14 years ago, but in the present he has to deal with a new one with even more grudge for him than any enemy he had made in his life. Bloody Mary found her way to the Canopy Kingdom and landed at Maple Crest, which is home to many Medici families. She started eliminating them one by one. Unavoidably, she ended up at Filia's house. Despite the family begging her to spare them for being different from the rest of the Medicis, she didn't believe them. However, when she saw Samson, she had a change of heart for some reason. Mary gave them a chance to leave the city as soon as possible. They were packing when they received a visit from Vitali. The sight of his brother's family safe and ready to leave the city made Vitali assume that they had betrayed the Medicis and sided with the Skullgirl. Without waiting for an explanation, he ordered his bodyguard to end their lives. Only Samson survived the attack. He found Filia barely clinging to life and decided to attach itself to the young girl to save her life. Thanks to Samson, Filia recovered from her wounds, but her memories were lost. And this is when the main game starts. News of the arrival of the Skullgirl and the elimination of the Medici members reached Lorenzo. He gathered his forces to counter her and protect himself. He asked the help of Eliza, a famous singer in New Meridian with a huge ego, and by asking her, I mean blackmailing her into doing their bidding. The Medici knew that her singing and charity activities were just a cover to obtain blood, which she needed to consume regularly to keep her everlasting youth. Eliza was the host of a parasite named Sekhmet that hides inside her body as her skeleton, and it is implied that she had lived for a very long time, so long that she and her parasite became almost one undistinguishable entity. The Medici underestimated Eliza. She was a lot more powerful than they thought, and, as she had put it herself, overqualified for that job, but she decided to play along with the intention of keeping the skull heart for herself. The Medici had another matter that needed to be addressed. Sometime in the past, one of their priceless treasures, called the Life Gem, was stolen by a gang of thieves calling themselves the Fishbone Gang. However, they were quickly caught up by Black Dahlia, who mercilessly cut them to pieces one by one. But just before she killed the last member, a feline girl named Nadia Fortune, she swallowed the gem. Then she got cut down in her turn. The life gem gave Nadia immortality. Miss Fortune was able to come back to life. Not only that, she could detach and attach her limbs and head at will, with no repercussions. She hid in a poor area called Little Innsmouth for a time, waiting for a good opportunity to get revenge for her friends against the Medicis. Unfortunately for her, the Mafia learned that she had survived, and they had the intention to claim the life gem back. This task was given to Sarabella, who was delighted to know that the Medicis were counting on her. She sought the approval of Vitali and was ready to do anything for him. Lorenzo's son had no interest in her and only saw her as a tool, but he knew her value. Sarabella was the only person who could use the living weapon on her head, making her an extremely valuable asset for the Medici. So he used a more gentle/charming tone when he ordered her around, taking advantage of her crush on him. Mary arrived in New Meridian and decides to make the catacombs under the Grand Cathedral her den. She ordered Valentine and Double to destroy Lab 8. She knew well enough that the anti-Skullgirl weapons were a real threat for her, but Mary didn't forget about her old friend Patricia either. She told Double to spare her, but the shapeshifter refused to obey. Peacock was probably the strongest anti-Skullgirl, and sparing her doesn't make sense. Valentine and Double attacked the lab and killed Dr. Avian, while neither Peacock or Big Band were there. Knowing that Mary was after the Medici, Big Band was in the Medici casino, as it was his best lead to get to the Skullgirl. He received an urgent call from Dr. Avian when the lab was attacked. He arrived too late though. The lab was destroyed and the doctor was dead. Big Ben deduced upon investigating that they were betrayed from within, and the scalper found at the scene left little doubt about the identity of the traitor. But his priority was to find the rest of Lab 8 folks, especially Peacock. Peacock had actually arrived before Big Ben did and found Dr. Evian still breathing. He told her that Valentine had betrayed them before he died, and the young girl went immediately after the nurse. Big Ben caught up with her and asked her to remain regrouped with the rest of Lab 8, but she was too stubborn to listen to him and continued her search for Valentine on her own. This is when Mary attacked the Medici Tower. The attack was so devastating that it caused the tower to fall. Surprisingly, Mary caught it to avoid causing innocents to die, showing that even as a Skullgirl, she still had moral standards. Seeing an opportunity, Brain Drain contacted the Big Band and suggested that it was the perfect time to strike Mary. With two anti-Skullgirls, Big Band and Painwheel would have no problem defeating Mary, who was in a tight spot. But Big Band refused Brain Drain's offer. Attacking Mary at that time would cause a lot of collateral damage. Disappointed, Brain Drain ordered Painwheel to attack alone, but Big Band stood in her way and fought her. Their combat made her more resistant to Brain Drain's mind control. In fact, she was already difficult to control for Brain Drain, and after her encounter with Big Band, Painwheel went completely rogue. Her priority was no longer beating the Skullgirl, but finding the people who made her like this, starting with Valentine. Speaking of the naughty nurse, after she destroyed Lab 8, she ran into Misfortune. The unique body of the Catgirl piqued Valentine's interest. She is a scientist after all. No, really, she is. She tried to subdue her and bring her to her dissection table to know more about how her body works. But Fortune was fortunate enough to run away from the crazy nurse. Valentine was very impressed by Misfortune. She sent a note to Brain Drain describing her. The mad scientist was still disappointed by Painwheel's resistance to mind control. He also had just learned about Valentine's betrayal, so he decided to make his own version of the Catwoman. He had lost all hope for organic beings, so his new creation had to be 100% mechanical, easy to control with a well-defined program. Enter RoboFortune, his magnum opus, the ultimate anti-Skullgirl with a questionable sense of humor. Additionally, she was tasked to eliminate those who seek the Skullgirl and punish the traitor Valentine. As soon as they learn about the new Skullgirl, Parasol and the Black Egrets moved to New Meridian to stop Mary and her undead army. One of the zombies they targeted had a peculiar refined manners. Parasol confused Squiggly, who came back to life as one of Mary's lackeys. Squiggly managed to run away, taking advantage of the confusion caused by Mary when she took down Lorenzo's blimp when he tried to escape the city. This is when Squiggly realized that her mouth was stitched and correctly concluded that it was Lorenzo's doing. She set off to punish him for what he did to her and to her family. At some point, she ran into Eliza and Sarabella. Being a singer herself, Squiggly admired Eliza when she was a kid and innocently complimented her never-aging beauty. She had no idea about Eliza's true nature. Leviathan, on the other hand, knew her all too well. Eliza offered Leviathan to join her and help her in her task, but he refused, choosing to remain loyal to Squiggly. A fight broke out, but Squiggly and Leviathan quickly realized they were no match against Eliza, her two lackeys, and Sarabella. They successfully ran away from a certain defeat. On the comfort of his couch, a former legend in wrestling was watching TV. Beowulf was following the news about the appearance of the new Skullgirl when he was suddenly attacked by the giant arm he keeps as a trophy. Spooked, he believed it was possessed and ran to the cathedral with the arm to exorcise it. He asked the good nun for the help, unaware of her true nature, of course. Double saw an opportunity to use Beowulf for her own interest. She took the form of his manager and manipulated him to fight the anti-Skullgirls, the only persons who were a threat to Mary and to the Trinity's schemes. Double, under the form of the manager, made Beowulf believe that it was all for the show. Fighting those freaks on the streets will help with his comeback to the spotlights, assuring him that cameras will be hidden during each fight. Beowulf was too gullible to notice Double's lies. Sarabella was the only one who was genuinely there to help for his comeback, as she was really a fan of him. Annie, a superstar whom he already worked with in a TV show in the past, tried to warn him, but he didn't listen to her. He didn't even believe it was the real her. Eventually, Beowulf got tired of beating unimportant opponents and declared publicly that he would challenge the Skullgirl in person. His manager didn't like his bold declaration. Double showed her true self and swallowed Beowulf. She took him in her domain, a mysterious place called Gehenna, where all the previous opponents that Beowulf had beaten were trapped. Philia started to get used to her very close friend when she decided to go claim the Skull Heart from Mary and make the wish of regaining her lost memories. What is strange is that Samson already knew everything that had happened to her, but for some reason chose not to tell her anything. He even denied knowing Pinwheel when they met her. The latter recognized Philia, and Philia herself felt that she knew her but couldn't remember all the details. She felt sad about Pinwheel's condition and had the feeling that she might have been responsible of it. Host and Parasite crossed the path of Eliza, whom Samson recognized as Neferu. Eliza mocked Philia for being unworthy as a host for Samson, stating that she knew his past host, a woman named Dahlia. Like with Leviathan, Eliza offered him to join her, but he refused. They fought, but the overwhelming strength of Eliza forced them to fall back. In the meantime, Parasol and her team reached the Skullgirl. To her biggest shock, Parasol found that her sister Umbrella was right next to Mary. Umbrella felt a bond with the Skullgirl that made her confuse Mary with her mother. When her mother made her wish for peace, she didn't transform right away to a Skullgirl, as explained before. That doesn't mean that she wasn't already under the influence of the Skull Heart. Years had passed before she became a Skullgirl, and during these years, she had her second daughter. Umbrella was born from a woman that was on her way to become a Skullgirl, and because of that, it made her resonate with the Skull Heart better than anybody else. She was the perfect candidate to become a Skullgirl. Double and Valentine noticed that and kidnapped the kid. The Trinity grew tired of Mary not being as destructive as they hoped she would be. She was only after the Medici and didn't want to be a good little mindless killing machine. They ordered Double to gather candidates to replace her. She remained loyal and obedient to Mary in appearances alone. In the shadows, she was working on stabbing her in the back when the time comes. So far, these story bits from each character's route could have happened simultaneously and could be considered all canon. But when it comes to how all ended, this is when things get complicated. It is not sure who actually made it to marry and obtain the Skull Heart. Skullgirls is not a series, and there is no sequel to confirm this. Add to that, each character's story and ending is elaborate and convincing enough that it has the potential to be canon. Most of them anyway. To top it all, and unlike other fighting games, most endings in Skullgirls cannot coexist. That being said, let's take a look at how each character's adventure ends. 3 of them ended up making a wish and eventually becoming Skullgirls, these characters being Philia, Parasol, and Valentine. Philia drops her initial motivation of gaining her memories back after her encounter with Pinwheel. Instead, her wish was for Pinwheel to return normal. A selfless and pure wish for sure, but the Skull Heart didn't see it that way. It considered that Philia wished that only because she feels guilty and responsible of Pinwheel's fate, and thus it's not as selfless as it seems. As a result, Philia will transform into a Skullgirl, but not immediately. As for Pinwheel, she did return normal, kinda. She still has big scars on her face and keeps Pinwheel as her last name. In short, Philia got screwed over by the Skull Heart, who took advantage of her amnesia to guilt-trip her into something she isn't even sure she is responsible of. But being a good girl, she doesn't mind her fate. Seeing her old friend smile again was worth the sacrifice. After beating Double, Valentine, and Mary, Parasol reaches her sister, who was too close to the Skull Heart. She realized that she was close to the heart for too long that it resonates with her body now, and if she destroys the heart, it would kill Umbrella too. Having no other choices, Parasol wishes that Umbrella never becomes a Skullgirl. The heart grants her wish, but of course, Parasol will become the Skullgirl instead. She takes her sister home and begins training her. She knows that one day she'll become a Skullgirl, and the best thing she can do is to prepare her own sister to stop her. As for Valentine, she ends up betraying Mary, which doesn't really surprise the latter. After all, she only joined them to save herself. Despite her questionable actions, Valentine's main objective was always destroying the Skullgirl. Working under Mary allowed Valentine to know more about her enemy. She also realized that there are higher powers behind the Skullgirl, and they are the real enemy. But when she obtained the Skull Heart, Valentine made a very curious decision. She is smart enough to know that wishing for her comrades from the last hope to come back to life won't end well. The Skull Heart will most likely resurrect them as mindless zombies. Her wish was to become the Skullgirl, which is very strange. Becoming a Skullgirl is normally the price to pay for making a wish. She could have wished for anything, and she would still become a Skullgirl. My guess is that she wants to know more about the Divine Trinity, and hopefully defeat them. And the only way to achieve that is to become a Skullgirl, which would allow her to get as close to them as possible. Of course, that could also end very bad for her. She could and would become a mindless killing machine. This is when Pinwheel comes to play. Deep inside her, Valentine hopes for Pinwheel to be the one who stops her. Speaking of Pinwheel, let's carry on with the badasses who destroy the heart in their endings. Pinwheel's ending is also a curious one. The Skull Heart tries to sway her into wishing to go back a normal girl again, but she doesn't fall for it and destroys the heart. Feeling that she is free now, she tries to go home, but her parents don't recognize her and only see the monster she had become. Heartbroken, Pinwheel receives another order from Brain Drain to return to the lab, but she is far beyond his control at this point. She is determined to make him pay for what he did to her, with a promise saying that he is next. Her pupils take the shape of a skull, hinting that she had become a Skullgirl. And that's the curious part. I'm not sure how is that possible, since we clearly saw her destroying the Skull Heart. Next is Squiggly, who encounters Philia in her search for Lorenzo. She learned that Philia is looking for the Skullgirl to regain her memories. Leviathan tries to convince Philia that it is a bad idea and it won't end well for her, and so does Samson, but Philia is too stubborn and goes to face Mary anyway. Squiggly decides to put her revenge against Lorenzo on hold and go deal with Mary first before Philia does. She reaches Mary and admits that the Skullgirl is a nice person in heart, but even though they're both victims of the Medici and have a common enemy, Squiggly chooses to fight Mary as she knows all too well what a Skullgirl could become eventually. Squiggly has the upper hand on Mary, but is attacked by Double from behind. It was at that time when Philia intervenes and saves her, and the two team up to fight Double. Double tries to drive a wedge between the two girls, but that only serves in making Squiggly furious at her. The combat ends with the defeat of Double and the destruction of the Skull Heart. And of course, that is synonymous of Squiggly going back being dead again. Our story ends with Philia paying a visit to her tomb. Miss Fortune's main goal was always to use the Skull Heart to resurrect the Fishbone Gang, whom she considers as family. But when she finally obtains it, she has a change of heart. She realizes that she grew to love her new friends as well, and she isn't ready to sacrifice them. She also learned from Mary's mistake. Using the Skull Heart will never end well, and so she ends up destroying it. But when she returns home, she finds that her close friend from the restaurant and all the Dagonian girls in Little Innsmouth were kidnapped by the Mafia. Miss Fortune teams up with the detective to go save them, and also settles scores with the Medici. After being imprisoned by Double, Beowulf is saved by Annie with the other captives. When he hears from her that the Skullgirl is near, he decides to go face her against Annie's advice. He already promised his fans he would take her down, and he doesn't want to fail them. After he defeats Mary, the latter resurrects Grendel, the owner of the giant arm that Beowulf is keeping. Against Grendel and Double, Beowulf was in a really tight spot, but is saved again by Annie, who takes care of Double, while Beowulf gets to settle all scores with his enemy/partner Grendel. Beowulf comes out victorious from the duel, and without hesitating, he smashes the Skull Heart with his chair. Annie recognizes his worth. Although he's an idiot, he's a well-meaning and very strong fella. She offers him a starring role in her popular TV show as a reward, but longtime fan Peacock isn't super happy with this new character.
Who is that idiot?
Worried about Peacock, Big Band reaches the Skullgirl at last. Mary reassures him that she wouldn't kill her friend after all. Peacock joins Big Band for the battle against Mary, and after beating her, he destroys the heart. The two run away together from the catacombs and seem to go along pretty well, exchanging asinine remarks and friendly insults. Peacock's own ending is a bit different, and it's my personal favorite. When she reaches Mary, the latter tries to convince her to go back. She really doesn't want to fight her friend, but Peacock refuses. She is an anti-Skullgirl now and has to fulfill her mission. Mary shows her the corpses of the slavers and the Medici thugs. She tries to tell her that she was doing all this to avenge her, but Peacock still insists on stopping Mary. She knows that his Skullgirl has the potential to become much worse than any mafia. Once victorious, Peacock destroys the heart without hesitating. Before she dies, Mary makes peace with Peacock. She apologizes for running away and leaving her behind to her gruesome fate. Despite everything that happened to her, Peacock still has her childish innocence and holds no grudge against Mary. Not only that, she promises to carry on with the vengeance against the Medicis on Mary's behalf. The next scene shows Peacock drop in at Lorenzo's office, ready to ruin his day. Black Dahlia steps in to defend her boss, and the end culminates in a face-to-face between Peacock against Dahlia. It's a very satisfying ending, even if it ends in a cliffhanger. Peacock completes her mission as an anti-Skullgirl, but at the same time, she honors her friend by continuing her revenge quest after defeating her. And that's what I like the most about it. You wouldn't expect so much depth in a wacky character like Peacock. Also, did I mention that she has the best super ever? Now with the characters that have unique interactions with the Skull Heart. Sarabella follows Miss Fortune to the catacombs beneath the Grand Cathedral, but couldn't find her. Instead, she finds Mary waiting for her. After defeating her, Sarabella refuses to make any wish. Miss Fortune jumps from behind in an attempt to steal the Skull Heart from Sarabella, but she is caught by the latter. Sarabella crushes the cat girl with her giant hands and extracts the life gem from her body. She returns to Vitali with the gem, and he is delighted by her success. But despite his praise, Sarabella doesn't seem very happy. She is probably starting to question her life decisions. I'm aware that I haven't talked much about Eliza. Her route has the most WTF moments of them all, and is also the longest, continuing way after defeating Mary. There is so much stuff going on with Eliza that I could do an entire video just to cover it. Without getting too much into the details, Eliza is playing in a different league than the rest. During her search for the Skullgirl, she betrays the Medici and just goes ahead and kills Sarabella. Then she neutralizes Miss Fortune and takes her as a prisoner. When she obtains the Skull Heart, it refers to her as the Crimson Scourge, in a tone that is completely different from its usual haughty and arrogant self. Even Double loses her temper at the sight of Eliza. She cuts off Eliza's arm in a surprise attack, accusing her of killing her daughters and destroying her kingdom. Eliza recognizes Double as Queen Lamia. No idea who that is for the time being. Without saying more, she escapes by tearing the ground apart and jumping down below to reach Gehenna. Double follows her, and normally she would have the advantage since they were in her domain, but thanks to the pool of blood, Eliza regenerates her arm and comes out of it stronger than ever. After defeating Double, Eliza leaves the hellish world and abandons the idea of possessing the Skull Heart, saying that she has no use of something holding grudge against her. Instead, she destroys it. After that, Eliza goes home to relax and take a bath. But her resting time is cut short when she is attacked by Philly and Squiggly with their two parasites. She easily defeats them though, and not too long after the battle, Squiggly goes back being dead again. Her body is taken by Eliza's bodyguard to serve as an alarm for the next apparition of a Skullgirl. As for Philia, Eliza mummifies her for the time being until she finds a better host for Samson, which would kill Philia for sure when that time comes. Then, out of nowhere, she decides to go for a quest for world domination using a giant statue made of what looks like solid blood. Her first target was the Medici Mafia. However, something even more strange happens. Mary comes back to fight her, operating a giant statue of her own. How Mary is still alive without the Skull Heart is a mystery. Double's ending is not a surprising one for the most part. She is ordered by the Trinity to take down Mary for being very uncooperative. They wanted total chaos, while she was only after the Medici. The Trinity grew tired of waiting, and so they ordered Double to take the Skull Heart from Mary and give it to a more suitable candidate. By the time Double reaches Mary, she had gathered a lot of candidates to choose from. One of them will become the next Skullgirl, while the others will be consumed. After that, we get to the interesting part. We get to see for the first time what the Divine Trinity look like. They are presented as two girls named Aeon and Venus playing a video game with an arcade stick. From their short conversation, we understand that they are controlling the fates of all the characters, and everything looks like a video game to them. The ending ends with their mother presented as a silhouette calling them for dinner. But not before Aeon says something interesting. She says that all the stories might have happened, but there is one timeline where all the threads converge, including theirs. I'm not sure what she means by that. Are they going to be playable in the future, or if there's gonna be one main story that includes everyone's? Only the future will tell us. Before ending this section, I can't ignore Robo Fortune's ending. It's kinda special. After she is convinced by Double to go to the Grand Cathedral and fight Mary, Robo goes through an existential crisis. Mario breaks the fourth wall during their conversation, saying that no one is going to think that this route is canon, and invites Robo to proceed with the unavoidable final boss fight that the genre demands. Robo obtains the heart and does something different than everyone else. She doesn't make a wish because she knows that never ends well, and she doesn't destroy it either because that will only give the world a 7 years break. So she takes the Skull Heart and returns to Brain Drain. They use the power of the heart to construct powerful giant machines. But without the threat of the Skullgirl, Robo Fortune with the new machines conclude that the biggest threat in the world now are humans themselves and proceed to eliminate them. A blazing battle breaks between Robo Fortune and Annie, setting the world on fire. This is the darkest ending in the game. The funny thing about it is the Trinity's reaction. They are delighted that the world is getting destroyed without needing to intervene. And you know what? I'm tempted to consider this ending as the canonical one, just to go against the developers' expectations. That was a short summary of Skullgirls' story, and trust me, I barely scratched the surface. It's crazy how much story and lore Lab Zero managed to put in one single game. It really shows the passion the developers have for their game, and the dedication of the fans. You can tell that real fans of the fighting genre are behind this. There is so much references and homage to other games and anime that it's just impossible for me to count. From alternative color palettes to unexpected cameos, wind poses, moves, to an entire character created specifically to make fun of another, namely the Capri from Ultra Street Fighter 4. Yep, I'm talking about Fukua, Philia's clone who plays nothing like her. I didn't mention her since it's confirmed that it's not a canonical character and she barely has any story. I also haven't talked about the new DLC characters. Skullgirls received a recent update in the form of a season pass that includes 4 new fighters. 2 of them, Annie and Umbrella, are already released, and the other 2, Black Dahlia and Mary, will be available soon. I decided to wait for all 4 characters to join the roster before talking about them. I'm very curious to see how Mary is going to play. She must be different than her boss form for sure. Also, who is she gonna fight as the final boss in her route? Maybe a canon mirror match, aka double, or is it gonna be Eliza? My bet goes for the second option. It's worth mentioning that the game has a plethora of NPCs and side characters, all with elaborate designs and unique personalities, and each one of them has the potential to become playable in the future. Heck, a lot of current characters had started as NPCs originally. This is a game that refuses to die. With this level of quality, polish and dedication, I can only say, long live Skullgirls. Special thanks to my patrons for their priceless support. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and why not consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.